bit of a scene setter for our political panel, which we'll now introduce for the day. We're joined today from Sydney by independent member for Fowler, Dai Le. Welcome back, Dai. And from Brisbane, Liberal National Senator Paul Scar. Paul, welcome back to Afternoon Briefing for you too. So Queensland election, as you know, Paul Scar holds a beaming smile on his face. I'm actually going to put, I thought you'd say that, put the first question to Dai Le. Watching from afar there in Sydney, Dai, what federal lessons do you think could be learnt from what voters were saying? Sure, local issues were very much in play in Queensland, but what's your take out federally?
Look, I was just listening to Adam Bant and, you know, I thought to myself, well, Labor should listen to Adam and, you know, according to Adam, that's the result that they got in Queensland as the result of listening and implementing the Greens policy. So, you know, if they follow suit, if we see probably similar, you know, result here in at the next federal election. But fun aside, look, I think at the end of the day, what we saw in Queensland and was, I think, cost of living really impacted the community there, as well as local connection to the community, and understanding your community and representing your community, be it local, state or federal, will actually translate to obviously a good outcome. And so I think cost of living played a very important role, my understanding, and that, you know, international issues, what other issues at the end of the day, is the local issues that impacts lives in communities like Queensland and Western Sydney as well.
All right, we might pick apart some further threads of what came out of Queensland, but while you're saying that, Dai Le, Paul Scar is nodding furiously in agreement with you, particularly when you refer to cost of living. I wonder how you straddle this, though, Paul, in a party which sits here in Canberra and says the government, the Albanese government, of course, is already spending too much on the taxpayer dime. So as you convert the Queensland lesson to where you sit federally, how do you reconcile addressing cost of living when you say government's already spending too much?
Well, Greg, I think that's reasonably simple to do, because there was so much inefficiency in the Queensland Labor government, which led to things like rego prices going up, electricity prices going up, their failure to maintain one of the key power generating units in Queensland, leading to power prices going up. So there's some real common themes here, and cost of living was a key policy issue, as was law and order, as was issues like ambulance ramping. And one of the reasons I was vigorously nodding my head with Dai was we had some outstanding local candidates who really understood their community and understood the issues on the ground, and they did extremely well. We also have a lot of newly elected women parliamentarians, new women MPs coming into the parliament. I think that's a great thing as well.
All right. The Greens vote, Dai, you touched on this at the beginning, and some people are suggesting there's a bit of a trend line running across multiple polls in recent times. They flatlined. They probably, you know, it looks like they've lost a seat, maybe two. But what do you reckon caused that backlash?
Look, I think, you know, being in the federal parliament and listening to, you know, I respect individual MPs representing their communities, and, you know, our issues would completely be different in a different electorate. So in my Western Sydney, we have issues such as energy, electricity bills, petrol prices, the toll, grocery prices, interest rate hikes, other issues that actually impacts ordinary middle Australians. So I think when MPs go and represent their community and stand up and speak in the federal parliament, often I feel that for the Greens, I respect them, but I think when they talk, I don't know if they spoke on behalf of the community or they spoke on behalf of the international community. So I think there's less connection between federal MPs to the local communities. So, but that's their choosing if they want to stay connected to their local communities or not. And I think the Queensland Greens, perhaps maybe there was a disconnect between what the Green MPs are doing and what they're representing in the state parliament to their local community. So I think we need to remember that politics at the end of the day is very local.
Yeah.
And we have to remember that the people put us there, especially in the lower house, and we need to ensure that we represent them and we need to
Sure.
stick to that narrative all the time.
All right, Paul, you're not a strategist for the Greens Party. I don't really expect you to answer on their behalf, but would you expect a course correction as you sit there in the Senate and see the way that they've played on housing, on the Middle East crisis, Palestinian people and the like? What's your anticipation from this?
Well, Greg, this has been a disastrous result for the Greens. Let's be really, really clear. And when you overlay their results onto the 3 federal Green seats, which they won in the Brisbane area during the last federal election, their primary vote has gone backwards and gone backwards dramatically. So the number of seats they hold in the Queensland Parliament has halved. They've lost a state seat within the federal Green seat of Griffiths. Their primary vote in 2 state seats within the federal seat of Ryan has gone backwards by, in one case, 7% and another case by 4.5%. And also in the federal seat of Brisbane, a state seat called McConnell, they've gone backwards. My take on it is that people are now understanding more and more what the Greens really stand for, and they haven't been impressed by the extreme positions the Greens have taken on issues ranging from the CFMEU, the appointment of an administrator to the CFMEU. The Greens were the only party to oppose that in the Senate. And they're also unimpressed by the extreme rhetoric of the Greens in relation to the position in the Middle East. Yeah. So I think the more the public understands what the Greens really stand for, the more they'll go backward. And we've seen that, as you said, there was a manifestation of that in the ACT. But there was also a manifestation of that in the Brisbane City Council elections back in March when the Greens underperformed. So we'll be working very, very hard in the lead up to the next federal election to make sure the people living in the communities represented by those Greens MPs understand what the Greens really stand for.
Yeah, I got the impression listening to Adam Banff that he's still processing whatever the message was out of Queensland. I didn't entirely understand it, but we'll stay in touch with him and see how that message is refined. Can I ask you both about something mechanical, less to do with the political issues at play, and that is early voting. So correct me if I'm wrong here, Paul, but I think you do 2 weeks in Queensland, and we had this really unusual disconnection on Saturday night between on-the-day votes counted first and the early votes released second. Do you think it needs to be shortened? I'm not so much interested in the Queensland jurisdiction as federally.
Well, I think at the moment, federally, we've got 2 weeks. It was shortened from 3 weeks to 2 weeks, but we're certainly seeing a movement. We saw it in Queensland over the last 2 weeks. More and more people are voting early. So in some seats, over 50% of people are actually voting early, and then you've got also people voting through postal vote applications. So it's certainly changing the dynamics of election campaigns, that those early votes are substantial in the first week of pre-poll, and sometimes the decision's nearly made in that first week of pre-poll with all those votes being cast.
What do you think, Dai? Would you favour a truncation of early voting? It's pretty popular, right?
Look, I think that we have to remember the convenience for our voters. In particular, in my electorate, there are workers, shift workers, and therefore we need to ensure that people have the opportunity to go and vote early because they have to go to work, especially night shift and weekends and all that. At the local government election, which I contested this year, that was truncated to 1 week, 7 days, which included as well a Sunday because we had a private company running it. And we found that, the majority of people, over 50%, as the Senator said, voted early in that first week. We've always had 2 weeks here, local and federal. And so that truncated down, I thought, was going to be a challenge because people were used to going to 2 weeks. But we had to get the information out to get them to vote within that 1 week. And it worked, but...
it changes the nature of where you direct your energies and the timing of the release of your policies. Is that what you're suggesting, Dai?
Well, it's, we actually, for me, we should actually have already engaged even before that 1 week anyway.
Right.
So I don't think you need to wait till that last week to get your policy out. We should have continually engaged with the community throughout the year, throughout our term, and that's what I do. So it doesn't, for me, 1 week, 2 weeks, it's not a big issue. It's about the convenience for my community and as long as we have the ability for people to vote early, that should be in place.
Yeah, and you'd pick up and acknowledge the popularity issue here, wouldn't you, Paul? That voters are literally voting with their feet, right? They love it.
Absolutely, absolutely. Greg, if you've got a choice between standing in a line for 3 hours on a Saturday morning or popping in when it's convenient and spending 10 minutes voting, it's pretty clear what voters would prefer to do. So I think voters are really registering in a true democratic way. They're registering what their preference is.
Their preference, yep. And I don't think there's any suggestion, just for clarity, that any changes would be examined at the federal level, not until after the next election, because these things are hard to turn around. Let's move on to Qantas upgrades, and, you know, I'll acknowledge straight up that you've both declared membership of the Qantas Chairman's Lounge on your declarations. Di, to you first of all, do you see anything untoward, or to use Peter Dutton's word, strange, about Anthony Albanese's patterns of upgrades? And I will stress on his behalf, since he's not here, that he has declared, or apparently has declared, all upgrades.
Look, you can declare, but I think, you know, do you pass the pub test? Why would you call somebody personally to upgrade? I just find that, I mean, strange is probably the right word, but I would not do it. Really, you can pay for your own upgrade if you want to. So to call Alan Joyce personally, and that then for me raised the question of how close the closeness is between the Prime Minister and Alan Joyce over the years. So it's not during his Prime Ministership, but over the years. So that it raises a lot of questions in people's mind. And in an electorate like Fowler, and for a Labor Prime Minister, working class, suddenly jet setting and, being able to upgrade constantly while people struggle, it raises a lot of questions.
I think the personal phone contact is asserted in the book. I'm not sure it's been confirmed or accepted by the Prime Minister or his staff, Paul, but where do you want to go with this as a party?
Well, Greg, I think there needs to be transparency about how these upgrades came about. It is one thing for someone to turn up on the airport in a morning and be upgraded because there's a spare seat in the class above. It's entirely something else for someone in a senior executive position to actually reach out and seek upgrade. So I think the Prime Minister needs to come out and be very clear and transparent with respect to how these upgrades occurred. This is not just a question of declarations, it's a question of how did these upgrades occur? What was the process? Who said what to whom?
Do you believe, on the accounts that have been published so far, Paul, that there has been a program of, this is the word used in the book, cultivation of Anthony Albanese over a long period of time?
Well, I think this is something the Prime Minister needs to respond to, because it isn't just a question of conflicts of interest, it's a question of perceptions. And when you've held senior portfolios, transport-related portfolios, before becoming Prime Minister, I think it's a question of judgment that you've got to be very, very alive to these issues. So again, I call upon the Prime Minister to be absolutely, totally transparent about how these upgrades came about. That's the key question that needs to be answered now.
All right. And do you accept, Dai Le, that in the normal course of work, that is absent a text message or a phone call to the Chief Executive Officer of the airline, that upgrades do pass the pub test?
No, I mean, I would not call the chief executive of the airlines to upgrade me. I mean, I would go, if I need an upgrade, I'll get to the airline. If I want an upgrade, just do it there on the desk and pay for the upgrade.
Right, but in your work, have you been offered them? Because, as I understand it, it's not uncommon to bowl up at the airport when you've finished a sitting week or you're about to start one, and one is just granted you.
Maybe I'm not important enough to be offered, but even if I was offered, I would not accept it. I'll pay for my own upgrade. Thank you.
Okay, all right, noted. Look, one final one, get a view from both of you. There's been some reports in the Australian Financial Review that Jim Chalmers commented on today. He said he has a personal view that it is problematic. What we're talking about here is R&D tax concessions that have been used by poker machine manufacturers and developers. Dai Le, first to you. Do you have a problem with that?
Look, can I first state that I'm anti-gambling, and we have a huge issue around gambling here in Fowler, as you will know, Greg, and one of the worst, I think, in the country. So for me, anything around gambling, I think we need to really look carefully. When it comes to tax, whatever, that's the government of the day who makes that decision, but it is concerning, especially for electorates like Fowler and Western Sydney, where gambling is a huge problem for the community.
All right. Paul?
Well, I think we need to make sure these R&D tax credits are used in the best interest of the country as a whole and need to end up being utilised in the right spaces. I think perhaps the whole system needs a look at. It is complicated, and I'm reticent about making any general comment at this point in time. I think it is a good thing that it is open and transparent so people can see who is utilising these R&D tax credits, so we can have conversations like the one we're having today.
Yeah, let's see where the government takes us. As I say, Jim Chalmers indicated a personal view that he might like to see that addressed. We'll follow that with interest. And thank both of you. Wrapping up there, Paul Scar, after a very heady weekend for LNP members in your state. I suppose I should say congratulations. Dai Le, we thank you as always for joining us on the program. We'll see you around here, both of you, before too long.